Good. And good afternoon. My name is Tina Nybo Jensen, and I'm Senior Coordinator Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym, the GSSB, held on 25th January 2018. This virtual meeting is being hosted from the GRI Secretariat Office in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded, and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB webpage, along with high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. Present from the GRI Secretariat today are Bastian Bock, Director Standards Division, Laura Espinach, Manager Standards Division, Anna Krotova, Manager Standards Division, Pamela Carpio, Senior Coordinator Governance Relations, and Gillian Balaban, Assistant Standards. We'll now start with a roll call of the GSSB. Mr. Dwight Justice, do we have you on the line?
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Dwight, thank you. And Julia Wilson, do we have you on the line?
Hello, present.
Thank you. And Kent Swift?
Present.
Thank you. And Kirsten Margrethe Hovey?
Present.
Thank you. And Michelle Wascher?
Present.
Thank you. And Nankumar Vadakapat?
Present. Thank you.
And Robin Leeson?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Sulema Pioli?
Hello, I'm present.
Thank you. And Vincent Kong? Let me see. Mr. Vincent
Hello.
Kong. Hi, welcome.
Hello, present.
Thank you. And GSSB Chair, Judy Kuszewski.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And we would just like to note that GSSB member Attila Yalikaya will join the meeting a bit later, and GSSB members Daniel Ingram, Jürgen Buxbaum, and Tongli Mo sent their apologies to this meeting. I'll now hand to the Chair, Judy Kuszewski, to open the meeting.
Thank you very much, Tina, and welcome to all members, and welcome as well to anyone who may be joining us on the live stream or on the recording afterwards. Thank you very much for your time today and this monthly meeting of the GSSB. I would like to start simply by having a quick look at the agenda and our to-do list for today's meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to take a look at the agenda. Are there any questions about the agenda that we want to cover today, first of all? Hearing none, I will assume that this is fine. So the first item on our agenda today is to approve the draft summary of our 30th November virtual meeting. You should all have received a copy of that draft. Can I have any discussion or edits or corrections or questions, please? Okay, I think that probably means that we are okay to go ahead with the review of. Yep.
Judy, sorry, it's Robin. I just did have one quick question. There was
yes.
There was a discussion point about the reasons for omission not required for GRI referenced claims. That was in line 64 to 67.
Yes.
It does say something about further advice expected at this meeting. I was just wondering if that's being held over perhaps to the next meeting or to the in-person meeting, because I don't think I didn't see it as an agenda item today.
You're quite right. It's not an agenda item for today. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what the decision was there, but perhaps, Bastian, could you fill us in?
It is indeed true that we had planned to bring this back to the GSB for this meeting, but due to the somewhat heavy agenda in terms of approvals and content that we have already, we've decided to move this to the next meeting. It is our plan right now, as it stands, to present that in the February call.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bastian. Any other questions or comments on the summary from the 30th of November? Okay, I think those are then approved. And we have, being shared on the screen now, we have a summary of approvals that need to be taken for this meeting. And the first one we have just completed, the meeting summary from the 30th of November virtual meeting. We also need to approve, as you all know, I'll just run through these scheduled approvals for today. As you all know, we had an electronic vote that took place in between our meetings from the 11th to the 14th of December, which had to do with the Human Rights Technical Committee and process around that. And we need to just check that and ensure that we are all happy with the process for approval that took place there in virtual means. Could you put the summary of decisions back up, please? We also need to approve the proposed code of conduct for the development of GRI standards. Unless there really is some discussion about this, it should be a simple process, that one, so that should only take a moment. We do need to take a decision on the project proposal regarding the revision of the waste disclosure to be shared for review, which we'll go into later on. And we have a similar decision around the project proposal for spills and leaks. And we have a final decision to approve new membership to the Human Rights Technical Committee. So I really do want to get all of these decisions through today. So with your forbearance, I would be very grateful to move as quickly as we can through the agenda today. Are there any further questions or discussion about the agenda or our objectives for today? Okay. Right. So then, can we, as the next item of business, we have approved the meeting summary from the 30th of November. I would also like to now flag that we are going to take a decision to approve the electronic vote that was taken during the 11th to the 14th of December. Is there any discussion of that? I believe you all received the summary email of the vote, which from memory was unanimous, if I'm not mistaken. If there's no discussion of that, then I will take it as read that the decision is approved. Okay, hearing no objections, why don't we move on then? Right. A very quick item that we would be remiss in not doing would be to say a welcome to our new GSSB members. I believe you will have seen their credentials, their biographies prior to this meeting, but we are very grateful to Vincent Kong for joining us today on his first meeting as part of the GSSB. Unfortunately, Tony Mo has had to back out of today's meeting, but we will be welcoming him more formally at the next one. Okay, moving on then. Can we look now at the proposal for the Code of Conduct, please? The purpose of this document is to ensure that the discussion process and the process of research and consensus building that goes into creating GRI standards conforms to an agreed standard of behavior and respect to ensure that stakeholders' views are heard and understood, and that the decisions are taken in the very best sort of spirit of collaboration and professionalism. So this proposed code of conduct has been shared previously. This will not be the first time that you have seen this document. I would like at this point to open this up for any discussion or questions that people may have about this. I am not hearing any. And I would therefore propose that this code of conduct is approved by the GSSB, barring any final adjustments or queries. Okay, thank you very much. I think we can take the view that the GSSB resolves to approve the Code of Conduct for the development of GRI standards. Thank you very much. Okay, next, we have an update on the progress of the occupational health and safety and water working streams. And I shall hand it over to Laura or Anna. It looks like Laura will be going first. Please, Laura, would you care to talk us through the status of OH&S?
Thank you, Judy. So I'll start with occupational health and safety, and I will be very brief. I just want to have a look at the project timeline for 2018 together with you. So as you remember, in November of last year, we gave you an update on what were the changes that the working group discussed in response to the public comment feedback. And after that, we did individual follow-ups with GSSB members to address their comments in the next iteration of the draft. Over the holiday period, the working group has been reviewing and commenting on the next version of the draft, and we are now just going through those comments and identifying key issues and open areas for discussion with the working group next week. So next week, we will meet with the working group again, finalize, close any open areas. We will continue refining the draft in February, and in March, we have a last meeting with the working group to agree on any final changes to the draft. In terms of the involvement of the GSSB, next month in February, we will be able to give you an update on what are the key changes that we have made since November. And for the March meeting, we're hoping to share with you the final draft of the standard for you to have a first look and to give us your comments. Following that, we will make any final updates to the draft based on your feedback, and in April, we will present the final standard for your approval. Following that, there will be the usual due process checks, and after all of that, we are hoping to launch the standard during the second quarter of 2018, so likely towards the end of May and beginning of June. In addition, as you can see here, we're happy to share that we have secured 2 speaking slots during the AICO conference towards the end of April, beginning of May. That is the conference of the International Commission on Occupational Health, and it's one of the most important professional events in this area globally. So we will be participating in a parallel session, and we're also organizing a special session ourselves together with some of our working group members, where we will be able to present the final standard, subject, of course, to GSSB approval and the following due process checks. But this will be a very good opportunity for us to also reach out to a new audience, a professional audience in this area. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to you, Judy, to solicit any questions or comments from the GSSB at this point.
Any comments or questions on occupational health and safety? Well, I'm not hearing any at the moment, Laura, and I think it really just remains to say that we've appreciated watching the excellent progress of this working group over the months that it has been working. Thank you very much for your stewardship of that process. I think the timeline that is ahead of us is quite clear. So unless there are any final comments or questions, I will simply say on behalf of the GSSB that we look forward to receiving the final draft standard in March and completing the process of approval over the months to come. Thank you very much. Okay, so that then turns to Anna on water and effluents. Anna, please.
Thank you, Judy. The water standard has been running on slightly different timeline, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of where we're at. So at the moment, we are in the middle of the second public comment, which will end in 3.5 weeks, roughly. To remind you, the aim of the second public comment was largely to present the changes that we've made to the draft, because of the extent of changes were quite significant based on the public feedback we received during the first public comment. So this is to manage expectations of stakeholders, as the standard has changed quite significantly since the first time they saw the standard during the first public comment. So we have reached out to clearly all the respondents to the first public comment for them to provide feedback again. We've reached out to the broader GRI network, including those who subscribe to GRI updates, as well as those subscribed to updates to the water project. We've offered our regional hubs to invite and connect to their networks directly, to involve their networks in commenting on this draft. And then we have also sent out a shout out through all of our social media channels. And so this time, we are not offering as many engagement channels as during the first public comment, simply as I have said, because we believe we have already received the most critical feedback during the first public comment and addressed that. So we're simply representing back to the responders. However, we can see that there's still a lot of people, quite a lot of people engaging with these contents and viewing these contents. So the progress up to date, and these numbers were checked last this Monday when the presentation was prepared, is that we have nearly 200 views of the public webinar that we've put on our GRI YouTube channel. And to put this in perspective, this is roughly a quarter of the total views for the water and occupational health and safety combined webinar that we've put out during the first public comment. There have been so far 50 downloads of the public consultation form, and that includes the revised draft as well as interactive features to provide feedback and comments directly. And we have had 4 submissions of the completed consultation form at the moment. So our immediate steps after the close of public comment will be to analyze again this feedback and share our remaining questions and recommendations to the project working group for their review, which they will then discuss and again give their really final recommendations in their concluding meeting on the 12th of March. After this, we will be finalizing the draft as well as the basis for conclusions from both of these public comments and submitting these documents for your review in the lead up to the standard approval in your in-person meeting in April. And so what you can expect from us in the lead up to this meeting is a preliminary update on the feedback from re-exposure during your call in February. After that, an update on the latest changes to the draft that we have made based on this feedback during your meeting in March. And then subsequently, documents that I have mentioned for review to be approved in your in-person meeting in April. We will then be looking at releasing the standard in May and probably have a more aggressive communication and rollout activities after the summer break in September. Again, Judy, I'll pass this to you to solicit any questions or feedback from the GSSB on this timeline, if any.
Thank you very much, Anna. Anyone from the GSSB have any queries or comments on the status or the forward timeline? I think it's obviously a very similar position timing-wise to the occupational health and safety standard revision, and we are looking forward to seeing the final draft. The fact that we have had so much engagement with really with both of these standards, but you can see it in terms of the numbers with the water standard drafting process. We know that this work matters, and we know that there are lots of experts and stakeholders who are looking forward to seeing the final results of it. So thank you very much once again for the stewardship of this from the standards division. I have not heard any objections observations or questions from the GSSB so far on this, so please carry on at this point.
Okay, great. Then I'll move on to our next session, which is the approval of the two proposals on waste disclosures and on spills and leaks. So the objective of this, for this session, you will need item 4, which is the proposal on revising GRI waste disclosures. And the objective of this session is to discuss this proposal as well as approve it for sharing with the GRI board for their review. We will also discuss and agree the proposed timeline for this project. We will be asking for your input on the key stakeholders or organizations that we should be involving in this review as we form the project working group. And we will finally be requesting the GSSB member to volunteer to become a sponsor for this project working group. A reminder about the background of this project, and maybe also just a reminder to the new members of the GSSB. So as the result of the revision of the water standard, we have moved all of the effluence-related content from the effluence and waste standard into the water standard, and that, of course, left a lot of gaps in the structure of the standard. So we wanted to address that, but when we started looking at the remaining waste disclosures in the GRI 306 standard, we and analyzed how currently waste management is being reported and what are the trends in waste management, we realized that our current disclosures are quite outdated, and so that led to I guess, a more fundamental revision or understanding that we need to have a more fundamental revision of this content. So the scope or the objective, first of all, of this project will be to review the remaining waste-related content in the GRI 306 standard in order to align it with the developments in the waste management space and reporting practice. And the scope of this review may also cover relevant content from the materials standard, because the underlying assumption or the driver between this revision is the shift to a circular economy and how waste is no longer being viewed as a invaluable resource, and so it is being cycled, let's say, back to production processes and products as instead of raw materials. So we might be including that in the review. However, we're not sure at the moment whether that is perhaps too aspirational. So, Judy, I will turn it over to you for any questions from the GSSB about the comments or any amendments to this proposal.
Thank you very much, Anna. First, any discussion of this? I think we've had discussion of the rationale for putting together this project at this time to do with the orphaned content that came out of the water standard revision process. So surely the basis for putting it forward should be quite clear. Any discussion of the detail of this? Any questions? I see one member is writing a comment, so I shall wait for that. Kirsten, please, you'd like to make a comment. Go ahead.
No, actually, I would like to make a question, neither a comment nor an amendment. It's regarding line 71 onwards. And it's more a question not only to this project, but to our revision of the standards in general. What do we do with the standards where certain disclosures are moved?
Could you elaborate on your question slightly?
Yeah, because in the two standards that we have been working on for a while already on the review, and now with this one, we are talking about topics from other standards that should be moved or should at least be revised or reviewed in connection with the update of the standard. And what do we then do with the standard that is not under review, but which contains relevant content for the standard under review?
I see. So are you referring to materials in this case?
Yeah,
yes. Okay. I wonder, Bastian, is there a technical response to that question as to how we handle that?
Yeah, I think as in technical, but definitely process-wise, the fact that we're presenting this project proposal to you now is caused by the fact that we have gone through the exercise that Kristen is describing. We have opened up the water discussions and moved parts of the contents of another standard into the new water standard because they have the right home there, and that triggered this process. We believe, and that is has been part of the discussions, that we have to release the new standards together with guidance on how to deal with those standards that are still valid for some time. There will likely be a transition period for all new standards, an explanation to stakeholders on how they relate and which elements of the standards that are still available for a transition period will be superseded by new contents in a different standard, and that pertains now in the summer months to the effluence-related contents, and going forward, if indeed contents of the material standard are reviewed, that would pertain to those. But that's probably something that we will address in a year's time or so, looking at the project timeline. But realistically, also looking at the human rights related work ahead of us, what we will probably find is that whenever we give the mandate to a working group, there are spillover effects towards other standards, suggestions to relocate contents. And what we're trying to do with this proposal here specifically is to anticipate one cross-linkage that we are aware of and that might be relevant. So we want to single this out in the project proposal and give the specific mandate to the group that they can but don't have to consider this. Thank you.
Thanks, Bastian. I think Sulema Pioli has proposed a question in the chat function, which I think may also be along the same lines. She says, I'm not sure if I understood the mention of circular economy and waste. Are we planning to merge contents, for example, materials and recycling? I believe, Bastian, what you are saying is that this is up for discussion as part of this proposed working group proposal, this project proposal. It could happen if the working group deems that would be an appropriate thing to do, but that is still to be worked out. Kirsten, you'd like to make a comment at this point.
Yeah, thank you for the answer from Bastian. It's clarifying in many ways, but still I think there is a need for some action in between new updates. We will have transition periods where content has been moved to another standard, and the old standard will still have, the other standard will still have the same content or same content related to the same topic. So is it possible to have some sort of a reference on the front page of those standards in question where that hasn't been updated yet, that for certain indicators they should look into another standard?
This is Bastian again.
Something like that, yes.
I think when you look at what I would call best practice with other standard setters, is indeed in line with what Kristen is proposing. There are notes to existing standards if there are changes in the overall structure that pertain to contents that are a part of a standard in question. What I would propose is that we, as part of the approval moment in April, for the two standards to be released mid this year, also provide a proposal on how we will communicate this, and that can be discussed in conjunction with the transition period, which we have discussed with you, but we need to formally approve based on the final contents.
I think that would be very useful, Bastian.
Okay, we will make that note, and that's an action for the standards division.
Okay, I have a written question from Robin Leeson, asking to confirm that the project working group will be the group to consider and refine the scope. That is, the links and potential revisions to one or more standards. I believe the answer is that the project working group will have that mandate to flag where they believe such revision in the scope or refinement of the scope needs to happen. Obviously, the final decision as to whether or not that happens rests with the GSSB. So it would need to be subject to your review and approval as it emerges.
Yes, and to add to that, this is Bastian again. I think what we will do with this specific project at hand here, we would prioritize the decision on whether or not materials and contents, or some of the contents that are currently covered in the materials standard, should be part of the update that we're focusing on. And we will bring that back to the GSB, that early in the process with the group, we can also give direction from the GSB for their further discussions.
Okay, any further discussion of this project proposal? Okay, hearing none. Are we, okay, thanks. Anna, will you just talk us through the timeline quickly?
Sure, yeah, the official approval moment is at the end of this slide. And before, let us tell you what is the estimated timeline, or the timeline, sorry, that we estimate for this project. So we will be sending, subject that GSSB approves this proposal to our board for their review and input. We will then be sharing the final proposal with you for approval during your meeting in March. And then we will be starting with the project working group recruitment that will start in the end of March and last for about a month and a half, finishing in the end of April. After that, we will be able to present to you the project working group membership in the end of May with your meeting. And then we're moving into a slightly slower summer period. However, we will be still kicking off the group in June and leaving them with a survey to review in July and August, where the group will brainstorm initial concept and content ideas, and this will also include questions around whether do we want to include content from the material standard or not. And then the group will reconvene for an in-person meeting early in September, and they will do the front-loading of the revision of contents in September, between September and December. After that, we will be looking at presenting the draft standard for your review and approval during your first meeting in January in 2019, moving ahead with public comments for most likely 60 days in February and March. And then we will be aiming to revise or finalize the draft in May and June, such that we can finalize it before going into a summer break, and then sending it for your approval in September, or preparing it for your approval in September. So again, an 18-month timeline to revise this standard. Do the GSSB members have questions or comments to this timeline?
Thanks, Anna. Any discussion? Anna, could you say a few words around what's involved in the expert peer review slated for October this year?
Yes, this is a format that we have exercised during the revision of both water and occupational health and safety, when we have asked a number of experts in the topics that either could not join the project working group due to time commitments or time restrictions to give us an initial review of the draft contents as they were being developed, and this proved to be largely helpful as this was sort of road testing of the contents with these experts that we couldn't involve in the project working group. So that will be, so we're looking to do a similar, or hold a similar format for this project as well as I think for human rights and all other projects going forward.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions or comments on the timeline? All right, hearing none, I think we can go ahead with the next phase of this.
Yes, so now we want to ask for GSSB's advice on the stakeholders that we should be involving or reaching out to, either to involved in the project working group or to have just expert conversations. So at the moment, who we have contacted is the Circular Economy, and that's a think tank in the Netherlands who are working on developing circularity metrics. We've talked to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, to American Forest and Paper Association, who have told us about some legislative nuances in the US around waste management. We've spoken to Waste and Resources Action Program in the UK, and as well as companies in the food, manufacturing, metals and mining, chemicals, forestry, and apparel sectors, so all kind of high waste generating sectors or sectors that have hazardous waste, to understand how they report using the GRI waste disclosures. We will still be contacting the International Solid Waste Association, which is probably the single largest global leader in or think tank in waste management and approaching this issue comprehensively. We'll be speaking with the UNEP Partnership on Waste Management, the World Resources Institute, who have developed the first standard on reporting food loss and waste standard, and Ernst & Young and their clean tech and sustainability services. Are there any other stakeholders or experts that you think we should be proactively reaching out to at this point?
I have a written question from Sulema Pioli. Are we planning to include any public entity that deals with urban waste?
Sulema, can you point to some specific entity?
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Hello, and Judy, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about processing and recycling requires engagement with public entities and authorities in terms of dealing with disposal of urban waste. And I was thinking that it could be useful to have someone from this sector. I can try to identify someone who has some worldwide plan or action in place.
That would be great. If you could send us these contacts, then we can revise them and we can reach out to them.
Thank you very much.
Hello, hello, Nankumar here.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like you to consider the electronic industry as well as the automotive industry, which generates huge waste, especially at the end of the cycle waste, end of the life cycle of the product.
Yes, Nankumar, thank you. Clearly, these are the sectors we want to reach out to. At the moment, we haven't found good leads into in these industries. So if you have any context, that would be great if you can forward that to us.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Anna, about this particular topic is that it's actually highly complex, and there are so many different. It's really an interaction across sectors, across industries, and across different types of organizations. Even on a sort of per material sort of basis. Just a single type of plastic waste could provide could prove to have a very complex sort of interaction between different stakeholders across it, and there will be a real trick in both having an efficient and effective kind of project working group around this, and also ensuring that the resulting disclosures and standards are fit for purpose across so many different situations where we can't really expect at this point to write individual standards for particular types of waste, unless the working group actually wants to take it in that direction, in which case we simply have to be aware of that possibility. I have a written comment from Julia Wilson, who has suggested some contacts at e-waste that have to do with e-waste recycling. So you can, I would suggest that the Secretariat pick that up offline and look into any of those specific suggestions that people may want to make. And I would encourage any of the members on the call to be thinking about, if any such organizations do come to your attention, to please advise the standards division quickly. I would say, within the next few weeks, in order to ensure that these conversations get going.
Great, thank you, Judy. Let me move on to one of the last items for this project proposal approval. So what we will be asking, according to the process, is for the GSSB members to volunteer to become a sponsor for this project. And for those of you who are new to the GSSB, what this means is that the role of the sponsor is largely to oversee or to follow, the progress of the project working group at a very high level, and to be able to represent the work of the project working group back to the GSSB when this is necessary. For example, in instances where there are dissenting points in the project working group or any dissenting opinions. So you will not be asked to chair any meetings or to facilitate meetings. You will be briefed by the standards division before and also after the meeting. So if there are any volunteers already, please feel free to tell us now. If not, please let us know in the next couple of weeks to the standards division.
Yes,
hello,
this is Michel
Namkumar here.
here.
I am okay to volunteer.
Great, thank you, Namkumar. Was there another voice?
I was also willing to volunteer, but I'm not an expert on the topic. It's just that Solvay, the group I work for, has a special interest in the topic, and we just signed a partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But if Namkumar is volunteering, then maybe he's more, let's say, a more adequate candidate than myself.
Michel, there are normally two, or certainly we have we are very happy to welcome two members of the GSSB as sponsors per working group. So there, if you are interested, then I think we would be very happy to speak with both of you about that possibility. And if there are any other GSSB members who would like to put their names forward for this, please do so, whether it's now or after the meeting.
Great, thank you. Okay, the final steps, the final slide about this project is that the next steps for us will be to finalize the project proposal incorporating the feedback from the GRI board as advised by the stakeholder council, and share this for your final approval during your meeting on the 22nd of March. We will, in the meantime, continue the background research and scoping conversations with the experts in waste management and reporting. And this is largely to inform the GRI staff about this space, but also the project working group, and define the scope for them a little bit better. And then we will be developing the terms of reference for the project working group, and we will be sharing this with the GSSB just for your information, but also for the review and approval by the GSSB sponsor or sponsors that volunteer for this project. And this will also happen during your meeting on the 22nd of March. With this, I would like to move to the official approval phase, and I'll hand it over to you, Judy, to guide us through.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. Based on all of that discussion, is there any hesitation or reservation or desire to discuss the proposal further at this stage before we are able to approve it? Hearing none, Anna, I believe that means we have GSSB approval for this project proposal. Thank you very much. And the next stage is to share this with the GRI board and stakeholder council for their information and any feedback that they'd like to provide before we get started with the project. Okay, thank you very much. the next is the Spills and Leaks project proposal. Now, technically, we have about 8 minutes for this on our agenda. If you, as you all know, we have a lot to get through today. So that's just a quick time check. If you would please carry on with item 5 for us.
Yes, and I will skip this intro slide as the objectives are largely the same to discuss and approve the proposal and raise any questions you might have about the timeline and recommendations for stakeholders for us to reach out to. But again, as a reminder about this project and how it came into being as well, the reason was the revision of the water standard when we have moved the effluent content related to and particularly disclosure spills and disclosure 3063 from the effluents and waste standard into the water standard. However, subsequently our project working group has decided that or concluded that spills have major impacts on not only water and groundwater, but also on land and on air, and these impacts are not covered by any other GRI standards. Therefore, we propose to develop a standalone standard to report spills and leaks and their impacts. The primary objective of this project is to develop disclosures to report spills and leaks and their impacts. And then the secondary objective is for the technical committee to identify any other topics and corresponding GRI standards that directly or indirectly relate to this topic, with the aim to then cross-reference these standards with the newly developed standard. Judy, I will turn it over to you to solicit any feedback on this proposal, item 5.
Thank you very much. Any discussion from the GSSB on this proposal? Again, it has the same sort of origin as the previous one we've just discussed. Michel, you have a comment.
Yes, first, as a representative of the chemical industry, I can confirm that it's really interesting to dissociate the topic of spills and leaks from the topic of normal day-to-day emissions or effluents. It's two different topics, it's a different management, and it's a different picture of the industry. When any kind of emission, it's not the same when it's coming from normal daily operations or if it's coming from an accidental event. What I just wanted to say in relation to the previous slide, because you may have accidental emissions in the air, not only in liquid form.
Unfortunately, Michel, I lost a part of your comment. I don't know if others had the same problem with the sound, but I understood you to be saying that there are issues not only with leaks and spills to water, but also to land and air. I believe that is also recognized by the project working group. But if I've missed the main part of what you were saying, please repeat it if you don't mind.
No, that's perfectly right. And I just confirmed before that it's really interesting to dissociate the topic of accidental spills or emissions than the ones of normal operations, emissions and effluents.
Yes, absolutely. Other comments or questions from members? Okay, I'm not hearing any. Anna, please carry on.
Yes, the timeline for this project is slightly different in that we're going to shift the approval of the, or we're aiming to shift the approval of the technical committee membership to later in the summer, and this is to give us enough time to wrap up the water standard and also form or recruit the project working group for the waste standard revision if approved. So here we will be looking at, again, soliciting feedback from our board by the 26th of February, and then we will be sending the proposal for your final approval in your meeting in May. After that, over the summer months, we will be recruiting the technical committee with the aim to send the proposal, or sorry, the membership, the technical committee membership for your approval during your in-person meeting in September. After that, the group will start with developing the draft standards and contents in between October and December. And we will be ready to present the draft standard or the public comment draft for your approval and review during your meeting in February. After that, we will be looking at likely a 90-day public comment period, and this is to close it at the beginning of summer and revise all the comments then, and then reopen again or reconvene with the technical committee for them to finalize the draft in between September and December. And with this timeline, again, we're looking at the approval of the final standard in 2020 in January.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments on the timeline? Okay, I'm not hearing any. Please carry on, Anna.
Again, we're asking the GSSB for recommendations on who to reach out to. We haven't spoken to any organizations or experts yet, but we were thinking to start conversations with the Environmental Protection Agency, as they have a lot of regulation and legislation developed for hazardous and accidental accidents. We will be speaking to the to IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, again probably UNEP, Greenpeace, as well as companies from oil and gas, chemicals, and transport and logistics sectors. Are there any other recommendations that you can give us as we start our research?
And are you asking for those suggestions now, or is that part of the feedback that you're looking?
No, we were asking the GSSB to think about it and send this over to us by email over the next month or so.
Yeah, so you've asked for any further feedback by I believe it was the 26th of February on the previous slide. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Very much. So obviously there is time to be thinking about your networks and any recommendations that you would like to make along these lines. And any discussion of this now from members, or shall we move on? Okay. We do. I've got a written comment from Vincent Kong, who is offering some suggestions with respect to organizations to contact later on. And if I'm not mistaken, Michelle is writing one now as we speak. And there's another suggestion from Michelle Washer around WWF as a possibility. Thank you both very much for that. Anna?
Yes. Again, for this project as well, we will be looking for GSSB sponsors, so please let us know if you would like to volunteer. And similarly, we'll be finalizing the project proposal and sending it for your approval during your meeting in May, as well as the terms of reference for the technical committee. And in the meantime, we'll start our preliminary background research and scoping calls with experts. I will now hand it over to you, Judy, to walk us through the approval.
So can you explain for me, Anna, if we are not receiving the final project proposal until our May meeting, what exactly are we approving at this meeting?
To share the proposal with the GRI board for their review in the state that it currently is.
So it's simply that it's at a kind of earlier stage of exploration at this point, but the process will be the same. There's just more time built into it for this project to refine and finalize between now and May. Are there any questions or comments from the GSSB before we approve this? Hearing none. Is there any hesitation from members in approving this, or shall we take it as approved? Okay, I believe, Anna, that you have approval from the GSSB to do as suggested and share this with the Stakeholder Council and the board for feedback as it is further refined over the coming months. And of course, as ever, the GSSB is asked to think about this project while there is still good time to influence how it develops. Okay, so the next item on our agenda, thank you everybody for all of that. That's been very helpful indeed. And we are just pretty much exactly on time at the moment. Laura is going to talk us through the summary of technical inquiries on the GRI standards, which come through into the, there's a place on the website and an email inbox where these comments and queries come through. As you will have seen, there have been a number of things building up that it would be very useful for us to have some discussion of. So Laura, please take us through this.
Thank you, Judy. For this session today, we're looking at item number 6. Today, we want to share, as always, a summary of the technical inquiries that have come in about the GRI standards since November. Then we have 2 items for discussion with you, which are a carryover from the meeting in November. The first item is on whether the range of entities to report on can vary between disclosures, and the second item is some feedback that we have received on disclosure 3021 on energy consumption within the organization. And the last 2 items are an overdue follow-up from your meeting in September of last year. There were a number of FAQ that you reviewed and gave feedback on. Those have now been finalized and been posted on the GRI standards website. And then there was some follow-up that we had to do on the status of definitions in the GRI standards, which we will present to you for review today. So with that, in Annex 1 of item 6, you can find the full overview of technical inquiries that have come in since beginning of November and until mid of December of 2017. If we can summarize the inquiries that we have received, I think it is safe to say that it's a bit of the same that we have seen up until now. So they focus mainly on how to make a GRI reference claim, clarifications around the term impact, and the focus on others as opposed to the focus on the business. How to report on joint ventures and how to report on individual topic-specific disclosures. So at this point, nothing to flag or to bring to your attention, but you're always welcome to flag any of these questions for discussion with the full group. So the first item for discussion with you is on the range of entities to report on and whether those can vary between disclosures. And we have received 2 types of inquiries here. The first one is a situation where a company is preparing a report for its European operations, but for the economic performance disclosures, it wants to report on global figures. And the other type of inquiry is about how to report on joint ventures. And there's 2 types of questions here. So one is whether companies can or should include joint ventures when the entire company is not consolidated in the financial statements. And secondly, whether it is okay to include the joint ventures in the topic-specific disclosures, but not in the general disclosures. So what we have at the moment in the GRI standards is a general disclosure, disclosure 10245, which asks companies to list all of the entities included in the consolidated financial statements and to indicate whether any of those entities are not covered in the report. But the standards do not specify how to go about entities that are not covered in the financial statements or how to report on joint ventures. And they are not clear either on whether all disclosures should cover all of those entities consistently. So to answer those questions, we have developed an FAQ, which you can find starting in line 63 of item 6. I will not read through the full FAQ, but I have summarized the main points in that FAQ here for you. And what we would like to discuss with the GSSB today is whether these are the right points to cover. And following today's call, we are happy to receive any wording or edit suggestions from you. So there are 4 main points that we are trying to capture with this FAQ. The first one is on which entities can be included in the report. And what we want to clarify is that an organization can cover additional entities in the report even if they are not consolidated in the financial statements. And if that is the case, we would expect companies to clearly indicate if there are additional entities covered in the report in response to disclosure 102.45. And then the next set of points here are about clarifying that ideally we would expect companies to include the same entities in response to all of the disclosures that they report on. However, there are different considerations depending on the type of disclosure. So for the general disclosures which do not allow reasons for omission, the range of entities covered would need to be consistent with that reported with disclosure 102.45. So for example, we have some general disclosures on the number of employees and the number of operations, and those two do not allow reasons for omission. So for those two, the same range of entities would need to be covered for the information to be meaningful. However, for those general disclosures or topic-specific disclosures where reasons for omission are permitted, if a company does not have information available for the entire range of entities in disclosure 102.45, it would be allowed to give reason for omission and indicate for which entities information is not available. And for the topic-specific disclosures, there is yet another consideration, and that is the topic boundary, where we encourage companies to just focus on where impacts occur for a material topic. So if a company has identified energy as a material topic and significant impacts related to energy consumption are only relevant for certain entities, the company would be able to just report information for those entities and clearly state that within the report. So I leave it at that and turn it over to you, Judy, to get any comments or questions from the GSSB.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Laura. So I have a hand up from Sulema. Please go ahead, Sulema.
I have a question without a suitable answer. I was thinking about how to report impacts from joint ventures, because previously with the boundary protocol, we got somehow a clear, not a very precise, but a clear instruction on how to report joint ventures. But I was thinking about the impacts from joint ventures. For instance, the joint venture between BHP and Vale here in Brazil, the Samarco company, and the most significant environmental damage caused by a mining company, this environmental accident for 2 years ago. So in this case, previously of this type of situation, how to provide a better instruction to BHP and Vale, for instance, on how they've been identifying and managing impacts from their joint ventures. And thank you so much, Laura. It's well explained, and the solution, it seems very, very suitable, but I'm not finding how to address the question about joint ventures. I don't have the answer right now, so it's just a thought. It's just a point to put more thought, more thinking on.
Sure, thank you, Sulema. So at this point, we don't have any specific guidance on how to report on joint ventures beyond what we have here in the FAQ. I think that's a very good question, but would probably require a more thorough or involved process than an FAQ. For some of the topics where we have methodologies available, like energy and climate change, those are referenced already within the standard, but this is not yet available for all of the topics we cover in the GRI standards. So this would be more a question for the GSSB as to whether we would need to develop more guidance on how to report on joint ventures with the GRI standards.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you. I have a written comment from Kirsten who says, I believe this is a very good answer to the FAQ. And Dwight would like to raise a question. Dwight.
Well, sometimes I raise questions and sometimes I make statements, but in this case, it is a question. My concern here is that if you have a disclosure that is not one of the foundational disclosures, and you limit it to an entity of the reporting organization, it could be that it's a violation of the material concept, because it might not be showing the real impact of the organization in that particular area, but a small part of that organization, and it actually makes the disclosure immaterial. But do we need to have some kind of language that way?
Any thoughts from the Standards Division about that particular question?
So I think the principle that is applied here is that the boundary and the identification of a specific range of entities to report on for a specific disclosure should be guided by the notion of where the impacts occur. In practice, it is probably true that data availability and other reasons also play into the definition of boundary for specific disclosures. But I think on at least a high principle level, we've carried through that notion that we have in the management approach and in the guidance on boundary that a boundary decision is always motivated by a focus on impacts and actually adequately describing the impact. So it's the other scenario, an organization has impacts only for a small range of entities to focus their reporting on that range of entities, as opposed to reporting holistically on all entities covered and somewhat distorting the focus on the impact. But theoretically, it is of course true what Dwight says, that it is possible to miss out on material impacts due to a boundary that is drawn not adequately.
Okay, thank you, Bastian. I'd just like to make a very quick time check here, which is that we have, according to our agenda, we have 10 minutes left for the for the remainder of this. I have not heard from any members about any other business that they would like to raise. Assuming that there isn't any, we may have an extra 10 minutes or so. However, I would like to encourage us to keep an eye on the time. I have Kirsten raising her hand. Please go ahead, Kirsten.
Thank you. I think that there have been good comments and questions so far to this topic. I feel very comfortable with how it has been written. And I also see that, yes, we could discuss this for hours and hours. What are the correct reporting boundaries? Where does the impact occur? And how should we report on joint ventures? Still, we have the standards as they are now. We have to answer something that can help those who are struggling, and there will always be a need for judgment from the reporting organization. For instance, we are reporting certain qualitative information on joint ventures down to 5% ownership share, due to to their impact in certain areas, and also due to the reputational risks related to it. And that possibility will always be needed for the reporting organization. And depending on the maturity level of the organization, how this will be handled will naturally differ. But I would be very careful to say something very specific, that such information should be reported in any case. There is always the need for this judgment from the organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten. For my own part, I would like to ensure that we keep a record of this conversation and ensure that we are aware as the Standards Board that we may need to return to this wider question that has to do with boundaries and joint ventures and materiality, to be honest, at some point in the future in a deeper way, even if we are satisfied with this particular FAQ. Robin, you are raising your hand. Please go ahead.
Oh, yes, thanks, Judy. I think some of what I was going to raise has been covered, so I won't go into it too much, but I think it might be useful in the FAQ response, given the significance of the principle of where impacts occur, materiality and boundary, that perhaps that becomes the overall context at the start of the response to the FAQ as a reminder of the significance of that principle, which is informing the overall FAQ response. In this case, I think that might be helpful to practitioners. And also perhaps if we include some practice examples, within the responses to some of those dot points as well. I think we've done that for other FAQs too. So I think that might be helpful in this case as well.
Thank you very much for that. I have a written comment from Michelle Washer. We see more and more analysts cross-linking indicators in ratios, for example, GHG emissions to sales. This pushes for having the same reporting boundaries as financial results for consistency. I just very quick written comment from Kent Swift. I agree with Robin's comment. The FAQ is good, but I like the focus on where impacts occur. Dwight, you would like to come back on this. Please go ahead.
Yes, of course, I didn't see Michelle's comment before I indicated I wanted to speak, but I don't think we have enough time to review all of the reasons, or even a tiny bit of them, as why the boundaries should not conform to the financial reporting boundaries. But that was not the point I wanted to make. The point I wanted to make is, where do we go from here on this? I mean, I think the Secretariat has done a very good job with what they've provided us with, but I still think that we need to look into this problem of distorting results when a disclosure is not matching with the whole reporting organization. And the other thing, and I also wanted to suggest this, I was having this discussion recently with several people. The whole materiality issue is not being understood very well, I think, and I'm thinking maybe we ought to do some kind of work with the result of guidance on materiality that elaborates the concepts in the reporting guidelines and sort of explains them and makes them better understood in some way. And I know what I'm suggesting sort of sounds very routine, but actually it might require a serious effort. But I think that there still is problems. There was a meeting I'm thinking of quite recently at the OECD, where it was very clear that that there's not really a consensus on materiality, even amongst people using the GRI the GRI standards. But anyway, I'm just thinking that in moving out of this topic. We need to. There's some work that needs to be done here, even on this response.
This is Bastian from the Secretariat. Can I make a proposal in regard to Dwight's and other members' comments? I would like to propose then at the April meeting, in-person meeting of the GSSB, that in conjunction with the review and final approval of the work program for the coming years, that we revisit the priority for work on boundary and materiality in the context of the resources that we have available. That it is an issue that has come up in the September meeting last year, and maybe we have to now look at explicitly mentioning this, scoping this out, and prioritizing as part of the overall portfolio. But from a technical perspective, my advice would be to put the FAQ as it stands in the public domain, make a note, as Judy suggests, about the comments made, and if need be, we can also discuss whether there is a second comment, a second FAQ at a future point that addresses specifically Dwight's comment. But the FAQ response as it stands right now holds together, is in response to the questions received. And from a technical perspective, we would prefer to put it as it stands in the public domain if there is no specific comment right now by the GSSB.
Thanks, Bastian. Yes, I would like to see if we can call the question on this particular proposed FAQ response and acknowledge that this wider issue of materiality and boundaries is really quite significant for us and should be on our radar as far as our future work plan is concerned. And there's no reason not to advise members of the public that we are aware of this. So if I could suggest that I would like to ask the GSSB if they would agree with this particular FAQ response, so we can carry on with the rest of this discussion. I have Kirsten saying that she agrees with Bastian's proposal, and Dwight would like to raise his hand again. Thank you.
Yeah, just a comment. I do not mind having this response put out in the FAQs at this point in time, but I think at the same time there should be sort of an indication that that we need to explore a bit further on how this affects materiality in the idea that a topic-specific disclosure might be misleading. So in short, I don't mind putting this out, but I think there should be some kind of qualifier, and I think that the kind of suggestion I made about materiality is actually not exactly the same as this. So I would say that we need to look at that point for this response later on, but we also need to do some more general work on materiality later on, and I see those two things as not being identical.
Agreed. Thank you for that clarification, Dwight. I have both Sulema and Kent voicing their agreement with the proposal that Bastian has just made. Unless there are any further points of discussion on this, could we move on? It's now 20 past the hour. I'd like to see if we can grab 5 minutes from the any other business part of the agenda because I have not heard that there are any, and carry on with this item for another 5 minutes before we have to move on. Would that be okay? And if so, Laura, would you please go ahead with the rest of this?
Thank you, Judy. So the next item for discussion is a quick one. We've received some feedback from stakeholders on disclosure 3021 on energy consumption within the organization. You can find the entire feedback in Annex 2 of item 6. And if I can summarize it, the feedback relates mainly to the formula for calculating energy consumption within the organization. And there are two key changes being suggested here. The first one relates to the item here within the formula on self-generated electricity, heating, cooling, and steam, which are not consumed. And the feedback is to remove the part that says which are not consumed, and to delete the last item in the formula on subtracting electricity, heating, cooling, and steam sold. There are additional suggestions in the letter, mainly on breaking down the energy consumption data by renewable and non-renewable energy sources. Our recommendation from the Standards Division would be that in order to look into these suggestions and comments, we would need to put together a formal review process and engage a diverse set of experts. And given the existing commitments within the GSSB work program and the capacity within the Standards Division, we would recommend that the GSSB looks at revising this standard later in the year. So when the GSSB looks at the work program again in the third quarter of 2018, that would be the moment where the GSSB could look at whether this should be one of the priorities for revising the GRI standards in the following period. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Judy.
Thank you, Laura. So the idea here is that resolving this issue that's come up through the questions received would require some technical research and consultation, which should be done as part of our work plan if we were to choose to revisit this standard as part of the work plan in the future. Any discussion of this particular issue? I'm not hearing any. I think, Laura, that is agreed by the GSSB that we do as suggested on the slide here.
Okay, thank you. So we will make a note to bring this up for discussion with you during the third quarter of 2018. We had one more item for discussion as part of this session, and that is on the status of definitions. Maybe what I can do is I can do a quick summary of what it is being proposed in the paper, and I would then invite GSSB members to send input by email following the call, and we will put this up again for discussion in the February meeting. In September, when we gave you an update of the technical inquiries that we have received up until that day, there was one inquiry on the status of definitions in the GRI standards. So at the moment, the GRI standards are not clear as to whether definitions are required, and if so, whether companies can deviate or use reasons for omission. The GSSB had a discussion back then, and the outcome of that was that we were going to go back and look at what were the specific questions that had come in through the standards inbox, and to also look at other standard setters to see how they approach this issue. So we went back, and actually we've only received one question regarding the status of definitions, and that is regarding the definition of corruption and whether that company could use a different definition of corruption, which would be different to the one included in the GRI standards glossary. Then we looked at 4 different standards to see how they approach this. The standards issued by ISO, SASB, and IFRS, and we also look at the International Integrated Reporting Framework. We found that the ISO standards are the only ones that explicitly require the use of terms and definitions, but they do not specify whether users can deviate from those definitions. In the IRC framework and the SASB standards, definitions are provided within guidance sections. They are not required to be applied. And the IFRS standards do not explicitly state whether the defined terms are required or not. So based on these findings and the discussions that we had with you back in September, we have developed a FAQ starting in line 158 of item 6, where we are proposing two main messages. The first one is that applying the definitions in the glossary would be a requirement in order to claim in accordance with the GRI standards, and in principle organizations cannot deviate from those definitions. And this is based on concerns that you flagged back in September on the fact that it would be problematic to allow organizations to use their own definitions and still claim to be in accordance, and also given all of the effort that has gone into developing these definitions and bringing them in line with international expectations and instruments. However, when it comes to those disclosures that allow reasons for omission, an organization, if it doesn't have information available for all of the elements within a definition, it would be allowed to give reasons for omission and indicate what specific information or element of the definition has been omitted. And for this, we have developed an example, taking the terms of employee and worker, where an organization would not be allowed to use a different definition of worker, but in the case that that company does not have information for the full set of workers covered by a disclosure, it would be allowed to give a reason for omission and indicate for which types of worker information is not available. So you can find the full FAQ in item 6. We would welcome your comments following this meeting, and we will bring this up for discussion at the next meeting.
Thank you very much for that, Laura. And I would just like to note that I personally would aim to put this early on in our agenda if we can during the February meeting, because it does go back to a discussion in September, and I think that we ought to really try to draw it to a conclusion at this point, or identify what next steps we need to take. But thank you very much for that. Laura, the final item before we close the public meeting is item 7. Proposal regarding membership of the Human Rights Technical Committee. Could you please carry on?
Sure, thank you, Judy. So next is item 7, and this is a proposal or nomination for adding an additional expert to the GRI Technical Committee on Human Rights, which the GSSB has recently formed. The nomination is being made by GRI's chief executive, and he is recommending an expert from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. You can find the profile of this expert in item 7 and also here on the screen for you to review. And their recommendation is being made on the basis that the participation of this expert would be highly beneficial for this first phase of the project, and that it would allow us to leverage the widely acknowledged and long-standing expertise of the Danish Institute when it comes to business and human rights disclosure. There's been some questions from the GSSB ahead of the call regarding the timing and the due process or implications for the due process regarding this nomination, and Bastian and Judy will talk to that in a moment. But just to give you a bit of context, there was last year an official moment in time as per due process where we asked the board and the SC to give input into the project, into both the project proposal and to give recommendations for experts that we should be involving in this process. So that happened last year. That is, of course, as per due process, non-binding feedback to preserve the independence of the GSSB. But it's also true that any stakeholder at any point in time can give feedback or recommendations to the GSSB, and it's always up to the GSSB to take that input on board or not. So having said that, this nomination is now presented for your consideration in the context of this project. So with that, Bastian, do you want to add anything?
No, I think, Laura, you covered all the relevant aspects of the decision, but I would like to highlight the last sentence again. It is really for consideration of the GSB and discussion. Judy.
Yes, indeed. I think it is acknowledged, obviously, that just in terms of timing and process, that it would have been preferable to have been able to include this in a different way earlier on in our process. However, we're making this proposal for the GSSB's consideration at the moment because, well, there really ought to be no real question as to the suitability of the Danish Institute for providing a qualified candidate to play this role at this point, and it doesn't cost us anything in terms of our process in order to include the candidate at this time, and therefore we thought it was worthy for the GSSB to give it due consideration. I believe I see Kent Swift's hand going up here. Would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, at the last meeting, we discussed some issues about the members of this particular group. And there was an issue raised about the lack of reporters on this technical committee, if I'm not mistaken, which I happen to agree with. At the time, though, we were sort of told, time's sort of up and we need to move on, and there will be an opportunity for reporters to have ample input. And I'm just, as I was looking again at the list of members of this technical committee, I was struck again by the absence of reporters. And we're asking now for an addition to the committee of someone else. I'm sure they're highly qualified. I don't have actually any objection to it, but I continue to be concerned about the lack of representation by reporters, and how, and thinking about how it is that we're going to make sure that reporters have their opportunity for input into this issue.
Thank you for that. Any further questions or items for discussion before we try to address this? Sulema, are you wanting to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Judy. Yeah, this is my main point of concerns. It's about timing. This organization, it's highly they do have the knowledge, the expertise, and experience on the human rights field, but I would be happy to have them before we did assign the membership of the technical group. And right now, for me, it's a little bit awkward to include a person who is highly experienced with the human rights field, because then we're supposed to consider others, organizations, others, people also with experience and knowledge on human rights reporting. So we had the first call of the technical committee last week, and I think it went very well. We do have the right profile within the technical committee, and I'm happy to include the Danish Institute of Human Rights from now on. But I mean, for me, it's still a concern regarding the timing. It's not about the organization or the right profile of the person. It's about timing.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Hi, I was just writing a message now that I'm lowering my hand again, but strongly support Ken's and Sulema's comments. It's something about the process here that I feel uncomfortable with. that does not mean I have any problems with the candidate as such.
Sulema.
Oh, sorry, I completely forgot to state that I'm not causing any trouble and in terms of a consensus. If the GSSB thinks that it's suitable to include this member, I will not vote against. And it's not a strong opposition, but we need to be very, how can I say, we needed to keep our decisions in terms of deadlines, timing, and independence. I know there is no breach on our independence by including this member, but and I will not vote against if the board is voting in favor. But I just want to point out that the time it's not, well, it's already said, so thank you.
Can I suggest that? Well, there's. I mean, I hear a number of members expressing the same concern over our process and timing, but not over the specific candidate in question. Can I suggest that one thing that comes out of this conversation is that we write up a communication to the board and the GRI Secretariat, and really to all of GRI's stakeholders, to clarify the requirements of due process around creation of working groups and technical committees, to ask for their future consideration to this process in order to ensure that the standards that result from any of the working groups are considered supportable and in the public interest. I think I have both Sulema and Kirsten again raising their hands. I will go with Kirsten first of all, and then back to Sulema.
I would be comfortable with that approach, and I would like to add that we should also take very well care going forward, that being assured that we do have the proper reporting organizations of reporting experience in the groups going forward. That it's not enough just to have the right competence on a topic. We also need to have the competence on what is possible and realistic to report on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have Sulema and then Dwight.
So I'm also comfortable with your suggestion, but I just want to highlight that in the near future, we should have a more precise guidance to avoid this type of situation in terms of avoiding to submit membership after the technical committee work started. Because Ben and Kirsten, they do have a point here. So if we are including this member at a late stage, it's an opening window for the situation to repeat in the near future. So it would be, in my opinion, for us to work in a more certain space, because the situation just happens right now, to have a more formal guidance on where to consider late membership or not in the processes. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sulema. And I would just say, as your chair, that this decision is in your hands, all of you as members. Please don't consider yourselves disempowered around this, but do let us know, if you want to keep this decision open or not. Dwight, please go ahead.
Yes, Listen, I'm very familiar with the Danish Institute for Human Rights, and it's a really excellent organization. And with respect, they provide an awful lot of advice to companies, including some of the leading companies on these issues. And that would, I think, include advice as to even how to report on human rights. The issues that concern me, one was already said, which was, of course, this time is fine, but then what do we do to discourage this problem in the future? And the problem here, I think, quite clearly, is one side of the wall, which understood the process and the procedures and the importance of keeping the distinction, basically just chose to come in late with their own recommendation based on considerations. But the issue is not now so much, but the issue is what about the future? Now, the other thing I want to respond to is this whole issue about including reporters. Well, of course, obviously, it's difficult to imagine standard setting without including the interests that are actually using the standard as they prepare reports. So you need that, and you need that for lots of reasons, for credibility, and you need it for just technical issues that need to be made available. But on the other hand, I think we need to keep in mind that there has been a study, even by GRI and by others, about the abysmal reporting of probably the single most important dimension of sustainable development, which is the social dimension. Human rights is easily the biggest and most important part of that social dimension, and the reporting is abysmal. So the issue then is to bring together people that are familiar with the world standard and the international consensus on the responsibilities of companies as part of the first stage. And then the work of this body is going to be looking at some very broad, big sky issues, as they say in circles, and looking at what is happening and what is the individual reports that now exist, and then making recommendations on some of these issues. In short, a lot of the work of this committee, by its own remit, is maybe not quite the same as the importance that we will need when we start looking at the specific standards, where I think the expertise of actual reporters is necessary. So what's going to happen is this committee will produce recommendations that we will review. It already does have reporters on it, but yes, it is true. The majority of the members of this committee are experts in the subject, but I think that's entirely appropriate given the preliminary stage of the work.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dwight. I think that's an excellent point to remind the board about, which is that this is the proposed first phase of this work. This is not a project working group, and they will not be proposing standards or disclosures, but we'll be dealing with some high-level concepts at this stage. We are over time on this part of the agenda, and I am not sensing a great deal of consensus here, so I would like to take the unusual step of calling for a vote to see where we stand on this. May I have a motion to approve this proposed membership to the Human Rights Technical Committee? Would anyone care to propose it? I'm not even hearing a motion to take a vote on this issue at the moment, so I'm not entirely sure that we can, in any sense, go forward with this proposal right now. However, without calling the question, I'm not sure that we have a definitive answer unless it is a consensus against doing so. Are there any additions to be made to this at this point, or shall we move on? Okay, I think that's what we will need to do. And I thank you all for your, Dwight, have you just raised your hand?
Yes, I just don't, I just want a clarification of, is this the final decision, or which is not to take a decision, or is this people are not willing to make a decision at this time? I just wanted to clarify what the situation is.
Well, I think we'd have to have each member speaking for themselves on this issue, but I do not seem to have any of my colleagues who are willing to put forward a motion to approve this member and take a vote on doing so. So I have to interpret that at this point to say that there is consensus against doing so. Whether that binds any future decisions or not is entirely unclear, and I would argue that it does not bind any future decisions related to this or any other technical committee or working group.
This is Bastian. I agree with your interpretation here, Judy, only to say that from a process perspective, it will be too late to include this or any other candidate at a later stage. We're in a phase where we consolidate the perspectives of the technical committee members, and we will move into a in-person meeting and preparations for that. So if it is not now, then we won't be able to accept any additional member from a process perspective. Technically, I think, and at due process base, you can always revisit decisions at any point in time. But I would strongly advise against bringing in an additional technical committee member at a later stage.
Thanks for that clarification. I agree that the train has left the station at this point, and this really is the only moment for us to make a decision. Sulema has asked that question in the chat function. Dwight is raising his hand again. I'm just going to call your attention to the fact that we have 12 minutes for our closed session. So I would like to draw this to a close at this point. Dwight, please go ahead.
Yes, I have no objection if we were to make a decision to include the Danish Institute for Human Rights in this working group today. The sense that I'm getting is that this is bundled with other issues, which is bundled with the relationship on both sides of the wall, and it's bundled with the process, it's bundled with the composition and balance of committees. And I think that if there's a reluctance to take a vote, it's a reluctance to sort of take a vote on one thing that has consequences on other things, and I think that's why nobody has moved ahead with it.
Yeah, I agree with your interpretation of the situation, Dwight.
Okay, well, and anyway, I just want for the record, I think the Danish Institute is, I have no problems with them being on the committee.
So Dwight, is that you making a motion in favor of calling the vote on this nomination?
Well, I suppose it could be. The issue is what does this do if we make this decision? What's the implication with these other two things?
Okay, I think we don't have an answer to what's the implication, other than the implication for the membership of this technical committee, and therefore, if the as I think you are correct in pointing out, if the reticence of the GSSB members on this issue is to do with the lack of clarity around those further implications, then I think it is sensible for us to defer this decision, which means in effect saying no at this this point in favor of clarifying our process and ensuring that we are committed to the proper way of making decisions, whatever that happens to be in the future. And in the absence of any other kind of way forward, I think that is the simply that is the decision that we are left with respect to this particular meeting. Are there any final last words on this? I see some words going onto the chat function. Sulema. And if I could ask you to be very quick because we don't have...
I can be the person who will propose the motion in favor, but with some... I would like to have a formal instrument or something like that secure for us a better process in the near future. I'm not against the inclusion of the member from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. I'm very concerned with the consequences of it, as Dwight just stated, and I just not want to cause any delay on the process. But as a result of this motion, I would like to have something that secure to the board and for me that in the near future we will not have impacts on our process.
Sulema, I appreciate your willingness to put forward the motion. However, my sense of this conversation is that it wouldn't really be wise to. I'm not sure that I feel the GSSB is comfortable with this because of the reasons we have just been discussing. Okay. And I think we all share a certain regret in the sense that there is no question as to the qualifications of the candidate in question or the quality of the contribution that the Danish Institute would make to this process. It is a question of process, of the due process under GRI, and I think that we owe it to ourselves to be comfortable with the implications of the decisions that we are making. We owe it to our stakeholders as well. And I will just very, very quickly and finally say that we need to keep in mind that we are only opening the earliest phase of the discussions, and that there will be many opportunities for many different organizations to contribute to the human rights standards in the future. So with that, I believe we need to call to a close now the public portion of the meeting. And thank you for the supporting comment, Robin, on the chat function. And once we have closed the public portion of the meeting, we have a short discussion for GSSB members.